In a 1992 survey, the vast majority of serving officers found the idea of serving with gay colleagues repulsive. And yet just 8 years later, in the year 2000, the ban on queer soldiers in the British Armed Forces was lifted.
Before 2000, it was illegal for gay men and lesbian women to serve. There'd be no red book, service record, there'd be no pension, no support. Being queer in the military could have resulted in a possible jail term and instant dismissal in disgrace. In 2018, I began my PhD as an oral history project, interviewing 14 or 15 serving and ex-serving soldiers who were queer. It was initially quite difficult to find willing participants. There's still quite a culture of silence, especially for soldiers who served in the 60s, 70s and 80s. The reluctance of participants was easy to understand. While they were serving, their sexuality was technically illegal. The repercussions for them and their families and their loved ones could be huge.
I joined the army in 1969 and I left in 1972. The plan was to be in for 22 years, but that was cut short, unfortunately.
I had never told anybody else in the Royal Navy that I was gay or that I even thought I was gay. I had very good friends in the Royal Navy, and the ban prevented me from telling them anything about my sexuality.
I knew I was gay and I knew what I was entering, but it was at the back of my mind. I wasn't going to let it stop me. But it was always on my mind, always constantly on my mind, but you suppressed it.
You can never forget it. That type of interrogation about something that you thought you weren't hurting anybody. All you did was love somebody of the same sex. What was so awful about that kind of sticks with you, whatever, and probably will be. Rest of my life.
Same-sex activity, known as buggery, had been forbidden under UK law for centuries. In 1885, Section 11 of the Criminal Law Amendment Act was introduced, making gross indecency a crime. This term was ambiguous. It could be used to prosecute any intimacy between men, and it was a label that would be used for a long time. Gross indecency was the accusation thrown against Oscar Wilde in 1895 and Alan Turing in 1952. However, following the end of the First World War, a brief era of liberation in America and Europe gave rise to a new spirit of sexual freedom and a flourishing of LGBTQ culture. Homosexual rights organisations were founded, and some countries even decriminalised homosexual acts. During World War II in Britain, although it was still a criminal offence, there was an attitude of turning a blind eye towards queer soldiers.
The need for troops outweighs any concerns, and although initially at the beginning of the war soldiers were asked about their sexual preference or checked for signs of being feminine, very quickly they were dropped. And during the war, there are many stories of queer soldiers being accepted into units, almost becoming a mascot. Drag shows were very popular during World War II for soldiers. So there's an acceptance, a tacit acceptance, if you like. The Second World War also created same-sex environments on a huge scale, pushing men and women together in a way that had never been done before. And the opportunities for same-sex encounters for queer soldiers increased tremendously.
When we first got captured, sexual urges still remained, and there was one person known as Clara who could be found in the swamps obliging the various people, and he would be around there. I never went there, I might say. Some idiot sergeant put him on a charge of being out of barracks after lights out, and this caused great fuss around. Everybody's wondering what's going to happen about this and very angry, and the person concerned, Clara, was marched into a left, right, and Captain Lambert looked up and said, "We've got barbed wire all round us, we're prisoners of war, it's quite ridiculous, you can't be out of barracks after lights out, case dismissed." Now, he wasn't a fool, he knew what the issue was, everybody else did, and he dealt with it extremely well.
After the war, however, the tide seemed to turn. the Army Act and the Air Force Act of 1955 and the Naval Discipline Act of 1957 defined homosexuality as conduct of a cruel, indecent or unnatural kind, and could be punished for up to 2 years in prison.
And the introduction of these laws mirrored a rising tide of homophobia in wider society. In 1938, 719 men were convicted of same-sex activity in England and Wales, but this number then went up to 2,109 in 1952. Increased persecutions of gay men see more men arrested for homosexuality than at any point in British history, including the Victorian times. The prominent 1954 trial of Wildblood, a member of the aristocracy who had been caught with 2 RAF men, was a huge cause célèbre in the press. Wildblood became infamous because in the dock he refused to apologise for his homosexuality. And with Wildblood's trial and other social movements, the tide seemed to be turning in the favour of gay men.
Throughout the 50s and 60s, pressure was increasing on the government to repeal restrictions upon homosexuality. Eventually, in 1967, the Sexual Offences Act partially decriminalised homosexual acts between men over the age of 21. But while LGBTQ rights were progressing across the country, this was not the case for the armed forces.
In the 1990s, the debate about lifting the ban was growing louder. However, in the Army, a 1995 survey of 15,000 personnel found that 80% of respondents wanted the ban upheld. The Soldier's Pocketbook of 1996 affirmed that homosexuality and drug abuse are contrary to military law, and that soldiers had a responsibility to their unit and, in fact, your family, to be constantly on the alert to those involved in these activities. Institutional policing of sexuality would be reinforced by internal surveillance.
Couldn't say anything like I wanted to say on the phone about how much I missed him. So we resorted to letter writing. And it's a result of the letter writing. The SIB intercepted one of the letters and put 2 and 2 together, that these 2 guys were having a relationship and they were both serving military policemen.
It was my roommate had told the SIB that I was in a relationship. The investigation lasted the whole sort of summer. Somebody at HMS Dryde tipped off the press, and we had the press at the main gate wanting to take a photograph of the gay wren holding hands with another wren. I denied everything to begin with, and then when I got poorly, I told my divisional officer, who was an absolutely amazing lady, I just said that I was gay. Just tell them that I'm gay because I need this to stop. She came with me in my interviews, and I admitted under caution that I was gay and that I'd had a relationship with a Wren officer. And they weren't content with that. They wanted to know details. And they wanted to know details as how often did we sleep together. I don't know why they needed to ask those questions, but they seemed to just continue questioning along those lines. And you know, those questions will forever haunt me, I think.
I think we then felt after that we certainly were being monitored. So in the end they posted me to RAF Stanmore to try to separate us. They produced a statement that my ex-girlfriend had made. I read it and my heart sank. So it was a very exhausting, long, bullish interview that I eventually did sign a statement which admitted my sexuality. So
in the hospital, they would ask me questions and sort of, have you got a girlfriend? And no, oh, why not? And how do you get on with your colleagues? How do you mean? Well, do you get on with them socially? And after a bit, you could see where the questions were going on this. And so what they were trying to do was ask you whether you were gay or not. And this person, I'll call it this person, it was a he, said, oh, we'll have to put some stitches in that, and you don't want any anaesthetic, do you? And it wasn't a question, it was a statement. And bearing in mind this is the military, I just sort of, yes. And he started stitching, and as he stitched it, he said, "This'll make a man of you." Well, it didn't then, and it certainly hasn't now.
The Daily Mail of the 7th of February 1996 predicted mutiny if the ban was lifted and quoted a senior military source who said, "It may not be the politically correct thing to say, but servicemen do not want to work alongside gays." The Sun was blunter. Michael Portillo is right to keep the ban on gays, despite threats by homosexual rights campaigners to go bleating to the Euro court. Over 80% of troops reckon letting gays enlist would weaken discipline and trust. The British soldier needs to worry about the enemy ahead, not some shirt lifter behind him.
And I met somebody at a nightclub who we spent the night together. He told me he was HIV positive, and this is 96, before effective treatment. He was very upfront about his status. I was quite smitten. I thought that we might, we could make something of it. And with the end was in sight. I had less than a year to go in the military, but it clearly wasn't the right time for him. And he said the Ministry of Defence were contacted by the Sunday tabloid, the News of the World, this morning, who are going to print a story that you're a gay HIV positive. I can't remember how much of this was at this interview, but you're gay, HIV positive, and you've operated on the Queen at Buckingham Palace. And at that point, it was quite obvious that the game was up. There was no hiding this, and it was quite obvious that who had told the story. I knew instantly that this was the person I'd met in the nightclub earlier in the summer. I vaguely remember saying that 1 out of 4 is not bad, because the only bit of that was true was that I was gay.
There's so much resistance to queer serving personnel because they provoke an existential crisis. If the military is seen as the last preserve of male masculinity, what does it mean if gay soldiers are able to perform military masculinity successfully? If women soldiers can, if soldiers of colour can, it shows that the masculinity of the armed forces is something that's democratic, that isn't just the preserve of the straight male.
In 1994, the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act decreed that being homosexual within the armed forces was no longer a crime, but it was still termed an offence for which you could be thrown out of the military.
Homosexual activities were still criminalised if they were linked to other circumstances, which was a loose enough term to ensure that homosexuality remained illegal in the army, despite this new legislation.
As I walked off the plane, there were these 2 SIB plainclothes and a uniform member, and I was arrested in front of everybody. And so I came straight off the plane, arrested, into a car, straight to the barracks and straight to the SIB interview room, where I would say I was there for 7 hours, constantly referring to my sexuality. I knew these guys because they were military policemen. So suddenly they turned on me, and I was scared.
The charity Stonewall spearheaded the movement to rescind the ban. In 1998, there was a long legal battle in the name of 4 ex-members of the armed forces, all dismissed solely on the grounds of their sexuality. John Beckett was one of those who had decided to fight his case in the courts. Basically,
I submitted an appeal against my discharge when I was in the Navy, and I was told at the time that this ban, this gay ban, this policy, does not have any avenue of appeal, any success. I approached a solicitor initially, and the first solicitor I spoke to said, "You've got no chance, forget it. There's no way you're going to take on the government and the Ministry of Defence. You're just not going to get anywhere, just forget it." But then I spoke to a second solicitor, and she said, "Yeah, I'm going to take this on." I moved forward to the High Court, the Court of Appeal, and then finally the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg.
In court, the UK government argued that the ban was necessary as the presence of open or suspected homosexuals in the armed forces would have a substantial and negative effect on morale and, consequently, on the operational effectiveness of the armed forces. But the judges concluded that there was a lack of concrete evidence to substantiate the alleged damage to morale and fighting power. They went further, calling the ban out for exactly what it was, saying that it was based on a predisposed bias on the part of a heterosexual majority against a homosexual minority.
Following this judgment from the court, the government of the time immediately announced it would lift the ban on the 12th of January 2000.
First exposure I had was a Mail on Sunday knocking on my door, asking for a photograph, and then I went to the newsagents the next morning. It was on the front page, and it said, "We won't give in to gays." So society began to change, and at the beginning, there was a lot of resistance to us challenging the MOD. But by the time we got to Strasbourg, most of society were on our side. We all met up in London, and we knew we'd won. I don't know why, but we knew we'd won. And I remember the announcement being made. I remember seeing it on the TV in the pub, the BBC News, breaking news. The European Court of Human Rights are found against the UK government. And within minutes, the MOD announced that there will be a moratorium on all future discharges. And it was just an amazing day that, we'd achieved something so monumental.
Military culture is changing. Army culture is trying to be more inclusive, but change in military culture is glacially slow.
I identified so much as being a Wren, I just lost me. I lost every single part of me. I just didn't know who I was for a long time. All I felt was shame. Not being able to talk about it for the last 33, 34 years is probably rooted in the shame that the military made me feel. The loss, the sense of grieving, it's a very, very long grieving process that I've gone through. And now with the lifting of the ban coming up to its anniversary, I think it's important that people don't forget.
When I was serving in the military, we never had a heap of medals. We had one medal, and it was the Northern Ireland Medal. And that got taken away from me. That hurt. I went online, and you put in your army number and everything, and it's as if you're applying for something that you're not entitled to. Because it literally, it just came back. We have no record of your service. We don't have anything.
When the troops marched in uniform for the first time in Pride, I cried. And I was so proud of them. And at the same time, so angry that I couldn't. And the if only feeling, if I'd been able to hang on for another 2 years, it's very difficult. So I'm incredibly jealous and proud of the people that serve in the military today and are allowed to be their true selves.
In June 2023, Lord Etherton released a report that showed the mental and financial impact of the gay ban in the armed forces. The report found that investigations into military personnel had been invasive, intrusive, and damaging psychologically and mentally. And the same year, the Prime Minister and the Defence Secretary issued an unreserved apology to those who'd been kicked out of the army for their sexuality.
In October 2024, the government announced it would start paying a £50 million financial compensation scheme for victims of the pre-2000 gay ban in the military. However, LGBT+ and military charities say that this amount falls substantially short of what is needed.